So it took me a while to discover it. But when I was at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida, I discovered mindfulness. How many of you are familiar with mindfulness? Wonderful. So I'm not telling you anything. But it took me a while to find it. And I found it in a hospital environment where people were in crisis. Parents who never dreamed that they would be there. Parents who had to let go of a child. And I watched the nurses who on their long shifts would deal with the parents, and most especially were taking care of the patients. And then I watched the staff. And I realized as a hospital chaplain that I was in a stressful environment that was filled with pain and suffering, with joy and victories and celebrations and healing. But it was a really charged environment. So I was drawn to this because one of my colleagues was mentioning John Kabat-Zinn. And I'll tell you in a moment who he is. So I said, okay, I'm feeling a little stressed because you watch everybody, the parents, the children, you feel incredibly sad watching all of this. And then I watch the staff and how it's a drain on their energy while they're trying to be present in those moments and to do their best. So I started a program with the social workers. And we met at lunchtime, and we got in a room, and we breathed. Because that's a big part of mindfulness, is just trying to get yourself in that moment, being present in the moment. And then spend some time with some nurses on the floor. Very, very few, because of course nurses don't have time to do anything except be with the patients. But there was opportunities there. And as I was being introduced to the principles of mindfulness, I was thinking about Jesus and the heart of Jesus. And then when I watched again and listened again to the words of Jesus on the cross, and we just went through that whole thing and went through Easter, I thought, you know, everything that he said on the cross, in that most vulnerable moment in his life, a time of crisis, a time of pain, a time of suffering, just showed me the heart of Jesus, but it also brought me back to those principles of mindfulness. It's like, so it's really true. There's nothing new under the sun. I'm not telling you anything this morning that you haven't heard. I've maybe repackaged it a little bit differently. So where I'm going in the next several months that I have with you is going through these principles of mindfulness. And the first one this morning is non-judging. Patience, beginner's mind, non-striving, trust, acceptance, and letting go. They're all part of the principles of being present. And each one of them is tied to when Jesus was hanging on the cross and his last words. It's like, oh my goodness, it does fit. And then I look at the heart of Jesus and I'm saying, well, it's just like these principles. So it's like everything sort of is together. So would you like a definition of mindfulness for those who are not familiar? As I said, John Kabat-Zinn, who was a doctor in Massachusetts working with patients who were dealing with cancer, elderly or adult patients, was in a very stressful environment. And what he did is he took mindfulness, which grows out of the roots of Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh, and he sort of repackaged it in a book called Catastrophe for Living. And he noticed that working with these patients, it made a huge difference in dealing with their diseases and the stress in their life. And so then he carried it into the hospital. And then all of a sudden it was marketed to other hospitals, which is why I ended up hearing about it. But you know what? It's a principle that works for everybody. His definition is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Now, there's another definition that you might like from mindful.org that says it's the ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we're doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. So I'm thinking I need that in my life because I'm not always in the moment. I'm missing moments. Being non-judgmental, which is the first principle of mindfulness, is something that we do as human beings. It's normal, it's natural. We make judgments. You made judgments of me the first time you came in. It's who we are as human beings. Can you imagine that first Sunday if you walked in here, even if you're a visitor, and I had on a black robe and a stole, and I only stood behind the pulpit? Your first thought would be, Daryl, come back. Your second judgment would have been, oh, he's the old school, stuffy, stiff. Well, we make judgments. What you're going to have for lunch today? That was really good. So many things in life. We make judgments about people. If someone walks in and they are dressed a certain way, we make a judgment. Well, the mindfulness says that yes, we are who we are as human beings. We will make judgments. But we have a choice. We have a choice to be different. Let me give you the definition of non-judgmental. It's bringing awareness and intentionality to the moment. It's being aware when the brain is automatically judging a situation, a person, and pausing to get perspective. So that's what I want, and that's what I need. When I make judgments that get me in trouble with myself, with another person, which affects the way I feel and the way I act toward myself and toward other people, I want to be aware. I want to be present in that moment to be able to feel that tension and say, I have a choice now. And I have a choice to be like Jesus. Now, I have to tell you, I really like Jesus. I think Jesus is an incredible human being. When you talk about heroes, Jesus has been my hero and will always be my hero. And if I had to choose a hero today that is alive, it would probably be someone who embodies the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Because he was a really good guy. So I want to be able, in those moments, to take a deep breath and choose compassion. When I am making judgments, I want to be aware of what I'm thinking and why I'm getting so uptight. And so, okay, I don't have to stay with this. I can choose something else. I can be like Jesus. I'm not locked into those old patterns. So think about it. Think about Jesus. It's the Sabbath. And he's gathered around with a bunch of Pharisees. And there's a person who is suffering. Well, you know if you're a Pharisee that you don't do anything on the Sabbath, especially this act of healing. Jesus knew that. And probably in that moment, he's realizing, okay, these people are judging this person, first of all, for being here. This person is about to judge me for what I'm about to do. And Jesus is probably thinking, I shouldn't do this. But it's that moment of being aware, of being present, taking a deep breath and saying, I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to choose compassion. And so Jesus on the Sabbath walks over and heals a person. And of course the Pharisees got upset, but that's okay. And then the time when the Jew meets the Samaritan, well, you're supposed to walk away from the Samaritan, but not with Jesus. That moment of judgment turned to a moment of compassion, because that's who Jesus is. And you know that the last thing you're supposed to do is touch someone with leprosy who is unclean. And yet, what did Jesus do? In that moment of judgment, it was a choice to be compassionate. And so Jesus chose compassion. Think of all of the other stories. Think of when Jesus saw someone who was hungry. Think of someone who was blind. I don't know if literally there was Jesus taking a deep breath, but Jesus knew what to do. He knew what everyone else was doing around in terms of making judgments, but in that moment, Jesus chose what was fair, what was right, what was compassionate. Listen again to the words from Psalm 145. God, you are gracious and compassionate. You are rich in love. God, you are good to all and compassionate to every single one of your creation. God is compassionate. And time after time, Jesus chose compassion. There was a young college student named Bill. And Bill wanted to go to church. And across the street from the university was a very conservative church. So Bill decided that he was going to go. Well, Bill's appearance every day, the way he dressed was his long hair. This was during the 60s. It's probably in California. T-shirt with holes in it, and jeans and no shoes. That's how Bill dressed. So when Bill went to church, that's how Bill was going to go to church. And he walked into this church, this very conservative church that was filled with people. He couldn't find a seat, so Bill started to walk down the aisle looking for a place to sit, but there was no place to sit. And finally, Bill got to the front and he just sat down. Well, you can imagine these people who were dressed like I am, and I know I'm overdressed here. They all had ties on. They looked pretty. No holes in their clothes. And here's Bill sitting down on the carpet on the floor. You just don't do that. Can you imagine the judgment when Bill's walking down? It's like, who is this guy? He probably didn't even shower. He's got no shoes on. Who knows what these people were thinking, the judgment that they were making. Then the problem was, one of the elderly deacons in the back got up, three-piece suit, a cane, white hair, and started slowly coming down the aisle. You can imagine what the people were thinking. Oh no, what is he going to say to Bill? What's he going to do with his cane? He finally, slowly, made it down to the front, and he dropped his cane. And he slowly got down, and he sat next to Bill. The preacher stood up, probably like I would do, and he said, "When I'm about to preach, you will never remember." And that's true, and I understand that. So forgive me for all the words I've used that you will forget. But then he said, "What you just saw, you will never forget." And what those people saw was a moment of compassion. When there was no judgment. When there was simply someone who was reflecting the very heart of Jesus. In the book of Colossians, it says, we are encouraged to clothe ourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So as I walk through this day, as you walk through this day, you will have moments to make a choice. As will I. As you find yourself in that moment, choose compassion. It will make a difference, not just for you, but the people around you.